Story 1. The Woodsman's Terror. I had always loved the mountains, especially the remote woods where few dared to venture. For years, I worked as a woodsman, chopping timber and exploring the uncharted areas around the forest. It was a life of solitude, but I found peace in the isolation. I had heard the old legends about Bigfoot from the local townsfolk, stories of a giant creature that roamed the forests, watching and waiting. I had always dismissed these tales as nothing more than myths. Until that night. It was a late autumn evening, and the air was crisp with the promise of an early winter. I was deep in the forest, further than I had ever gone before, searching for the perfect trees to harvest before the season changed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to set up camp for the night. I found a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees, a perfect spot that provided shelter from the wind. I built a fire and settled in, the warmth of the flames pushing back the encroaching darkness. The forest was eerily quiet that night. The usual sounds of nocturnal creatures were absent, leaving an unsettling stillness that pressed against my ears. I brushed off the unease, attributing it to the remoteness of the location. I was miles away from the nearest road or cabin, truly alone in the heart of the wilderness. As I sat by the fire, enjoying the solitude, I heard a faint rustling sound coming from the woods behind me. I turned, peering into the darkness, but saw nothing. I told myself it was just a deer or some other animal, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The rustling grew louder, now accompanied by the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps. My heart began to race as I grabbed my flashlight and aimed toward the noise. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but shadows and trees. I strained my eyes, trying to make out any movement, but the forest remained still. I returned to the fire, trying to calm my nerves. But then I heard a low, guttural growl that echoed through the clearing. It was unlike anything I had ever heard, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a bear or any animal I was familiar with. It was something else, something larger. I stood up slowly, my eyes scanning the tree line. That's when I saw it. A massive figure stood at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden in the shadows. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, with broad shoulders and a thick, muscular build. Its eyes glowed faintly in the reflection of the firelight, piercing through the darkness like 2 burning embers. For a moment, it just stood there, watching me with an intelligence that was both terrifying and fascinating. I was paralyzed with fear. My mind raced with the realization of what I was seeing. This was no animal. This was something else, something from the old stories. Bigfoot. The creature stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. The ground seemed to tremble under its weight as it approached, each step accompanied by a deep, rumbling growl. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the fire. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed the hatchet lying next to my gear, holding it out in a feeble attempt to defend myself. The creature stopped just a few feet away, towering over me. Its face was partially obscured by shadows, but I could see its eyes cold, intelligent, and filled with a predatory focus. It opened its mouth, revealing sharp teeth, and let out a low, guttural sound that sent a wave of terror through me. For a moment, we stood there, locked in a silent standoff. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. The creature tilted its head slightly, studying me, its eyes narrowing as if deciding what to do next. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin, my hands trembling as I gripped the hatchet. Then, without warning, the creature turned and disappeared into the woods. It moved swiftly and silently, vanishing into the darkness as if it had never been there. I stood there, stunned and shaking, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The forest around me was silent once again, the only sound the crackling of the fire. I collapsed onto the ground, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, my eyes glued to the tree line, waiting for the creature to return. But it never did. When dawn finally broke, I packed up my gear and left the forest, abandoning the trees I had planned to harvest. As I made my way back to the town, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. It was as if the forest itself had come alive, hiding something ancient and terrifying within its depths. I never went back to that part of the woods again. To this day, I can't explain what I saw. But I know one thing for certain: Bigfoot is real, and it's out there, watching and waiting in the shadows of the forest. And sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees, I hear that low growl in the distance, reminding me of the night I came face to face with the legend. Story 2. The Night Watcher. As a park ranger, I had seen my fair share of strange occurrences in the vast wilderness I patrolled. From missing hikers to inexplicable animal behavior, I thought I had seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for the events of that cold winter night. It was mid-January, and the park was mostly deserted, with only a few campers brave enough to endure the harsh winter conditions. My job was to ensure the safety of the park and its visitors, making routine patrols around the trails and campsites. That night, a heavy snowstorm was rolling in, and I was out on one last patrol before hunkering down in the ranger station. As I drove along the winding dirt road that cut through the forest, the snow began to fall steadily, covering the ground in a blanket of white. The trees loomed tall on either side of the road, their branches weighed down by the snow, casting long shadows in the fading light. The radio crackled with static, a reminder of how isolated I was from the rest of the world. I was about to turn back when I noticed something odd. Up ahead, near the edge of the tree line, I saw movement, large, deliberate movement. I slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield. At first, I thought it was a bear, but as I got closer, I realized it was something much larger. A massive figure stood just beyond the road, partially obscured by the falling snow. It was at least 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a thick, fur-covered body. My heart skipped a beat. I reached for my flashlight, aiming it towards the figure. The beam of light cut through the snowstorm, illuminating the creature. It wasn't a bear. The creature turned towards the light, and I caught a glimpse of its face, an eerie mix of human and ape-like features, with deep-set eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. It let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that reverberated through the air and sent a shiver down my spine. I sat there, frozen in the truck, staring at the creature. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It stepped forward, its movements fluid and powerful. The ground seemed to shake under its weight as it approached the road. I could feel the primal fear rising within me, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But I couldn't move. I was captivated by the creature's presence, the sheer size and power of it. It stopped at the edge of the road, standing still as if sizing me up. My grip tightened on the flashlight, the beam shaking slightly as my hand trembled. For what felt like an eternity, we stared at each other. The creature's eyes bore into mine, cold and intelligent. I felt like it was looking through me, seeing something I couldn't comprehend. Then slowly, it raised its arm, pointing a long, clawed finger at the truck. A wave of terror washed over me. I snapped out of my trance, fumbling with the gear shift. The creature let out a deafening roar, a sound that echoed through the forest, causing the trees to shudder. I slammed the truck into reverse, the tires spinning in the snow as I backed away. The creature watched me, its eyes glowing with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I turned the truck around, my heart pounding in my chest, and sped back towards the ranger station. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature retreat into the woods, disappearing into the darkness as if it had never been there. The forest closed around it, swallowing the evidence of its existence. I reached the station in a state of shock, my mind racing with what I had just witnessed. I locked the doors and grabbed the radio, my hands shaking as I tried to call for backup. The storm made the signal weak, but I managed to get through to the main office, my voice trembling as I described the encounter. They sent out a search team the next day, but the snowstorm had covered any tracks the creature might have left. The forest was eerily quiet, the trees heavy with snow. They found nothing, no footprints, no signs of the creature. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. The official report dismissed it as a bear sighting, a misidentification in the poor weather conditions. But I knew what I had seen. It wasn't a bear. It was something else, something ancient and unknown, that roamed the forest under the cover of darkness. I continued my duties as a park ranger, but the encounter changed me. Every night, when the storm winds howled through the trees, I would think of those glowing eyes, watching from the shadows. I avoided that part of the forest whenever possible, but sometimes, late at night, I would catch glimpses of movement at the edge of my vision, a fleeting shadow, a rustle of branches. And in those moments, I knew it was still out there, the night watcher of the forest, waiting and watching for its next encounter. Story 3. The Cabin Encounter. My family owned an old cabin in the woods, a rustic place that had been passed down through generations. It was remote, nestled deep within a forest that stretched for miles. Growing up, we spent countless summers there, enjoying the tranquility of nature. But as I got older, the visits became less frequent. Life got busy, and the cabin was left to the silence of the woods. One autumn, I decided to take a break from the city and spend a weekend at the cabin. I needed the solitude, a chance to escape from the stress of everyday life. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sky already turning a shade of orange as the sun began to set. The cabin stood as I remembered it, slightly worn but full of memories. I spent the first evening by the fireplace, reading and enjoying the peace. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. As night fell, the forest around the cabin grew darker, and an eerie stillness settled over the area. I felt a strange sense of unease, as if the woods were holding their breath. I shrugged it off and went to bed early, hoping for a good night's sleep. But around midnight, I was awoken by a sound, a low, rhythmic thumping coming from outside the cabin. I lay there in the dark listening. The sound was faint at first, like something heavy moving through the forest. It grew louder, more deliberate, each thump resonating through the walls of the cabin. I sat up, my heart pounding. My first thought was a bear, but something about the sound felt wrong. It wasn't the random movements of an animal. It was purposeful, as if something was making its way toward the cabin. I got out of bed, moving slowly to the window. I hesitated before pulling back the curtain, peering into the darkness. The moonlight cast long shadows across the clearing, illuminating the edge of the woods. For a moment, I saw nothing but trees and darkness. And then it emerged. A massive figure stepped out from the tree line, its form partially obscured by the shadows. It was tall, at least 8 feet, with broad shoulders and a hulking build covered in dark fur. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I was seeing. It was Bigfoot. The creature moved slowly, each step heavy and deliberate. It approached the cabin, its eyes reflecting the moonlight like 2 glowing orbs. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I had always been a skeptic, dismissing stories of Bigfoot as myths and legends. But now here it was, standing just yards away from me. I reached for my phone, but of course there was no signal. The cabin was too remote. I was alone, with nothing but a thin wall separating me from whatever this thing was. I looked around, searching for something to defend myself with, my hands trembling. The creature circled the cabin, its footsteps echoing through the stillness of the night. Then it stopped. I listened, holding my breath, straining to hear any movement. The silence was deafening, and then, slowly, the doorknob began to turn. I stumbled back, my heart leaping into my throat. The door creaked as it rattled against the frame, the creature testing it, trying to get inside. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob, my body trembling with fear. The door shook again, harder this time, as the creature pressed against it. I backed away, retreating to the corner of the room. The door shuddered under the force, the wood groaning as if it would splinter at any moment. I could hear its breathing, now a deep, guttural sound that reverberated through the cabin. My mind screamed at me to do something, to fight or to flee, but I was paralyzed with terror. Then, as suddenly as it began, the assault stopped. The cabin fell silent, the air thick with tension. I waited, my eyes glued to the door, expecting it to burst open at any second. But there was nothing, just the heavy, oppressive silence that filled the room. I crept to the window, peeking through the curtain. The creature was standing in the clearing, staring at the cabin. Its eyes were fixed on the window, on me. It raised its head and let out a low, guttural roar that echoed through the forest, sending a wave of fear through me. And then it turned and disappeared into the woods, vanishing into the darkness as if it had never been there. I stayed awake the rest of the night, every sound amplified in the stillness. I didn't dare go outside, didn't dare to move. When morning finally came, I packed my things and left the cabin. As I drove away, I glanced back at the woods, half expecting to see those glowing eyes watching me. But the forest was silent, shrouded in the mist of the early dawn. I never went back to that cabin. The memory of that night, of the creature that watched me from the shadows, haunted me for years. I told a few people what happened, but most dismissed it as a figment of my imagination, a product of being alone in the woods. But I know what I saw. Bigfoot is real, and it's out there, roaming the forests, watching from the darkness. And sometimes when the night is still and the wind is right, I hear that low thumping in the distance, a reminder of the creature that came to my door, testing the boundary between its world and mine. Hey there, it's Mr. Night Horror. If you enjoyed this eerie journey and want to dive deeper into the shadows with us, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back with more spine-chilling tales tomorrow. Stay haunted.